Hi everyone, my name is Habi Abiola, and on today's lab, I'll be talking about my second hack part one for my QGIS 2 machine. And here are my objectives for my lab, um, which I'll be doing my intrusive scan on my QGIS 2. I'll be utilizing my Nikto, my OWASP, my Nessus. I will be exploring at least 10 possible vulnerability identified on the system. Here is my NAP intrusive scan on my target QGIS 2, which is 192.168.56.112. And here it shows there are some open ports, which I will be actually doing vulnerability scan on later on. So here I utilized Nikto. I actually installed Nikto on my Kali Linux. So I use that against my target IP, which is for my QGIS 2 machine. So as you can see, I ran it against target. The target port is port 80, and you can see there are some vulnerability that are present. We have the anti-clickjacking S-frame option header is not present, and it shows that the X content type option header is not set, as well as the Apache 2.052 appears to be outdated. And then on this slide, we'll be talking about the difference between the Nikto and the OWASP. So Nikto is a versatile open source tool that provides a wide range of features, including SSL support, proxy usage, host authentication, and so on and so forth. So one of its convenient functionalities is the ability to automatically update itself directly from the command line. So with Nikto's wide array of features and capabilities, it empowers users to conduct comprehensive scans, thoroughly examine the server's configuration, identifying outdated software versions, and pinpointing any potential misconfiguration or insecure practices. So Nikto enables users to uncover common vulnerabilities such as SQL injections, cross-site scripting, and other potential entry points for malicious attackers. So then for the OWASP, on the other hand, OWASP is an open source as well. It's widely used by by developers and professionals. So they actually use the OWASP to detect vulnerabilities in web applications. It can run passively scan web requests. It can search for files and folders on servers. It can identify its site structures, and it can even intercept and modify web requests. So OWASP can find vulnerabilities such as compromised authentication, exposed sensitive data, misconfiguration, SQL injection, SSS, among others. So OWASP acts as a mediator between the browsers and the application, intercepting and analyzing all communications between the browser and the application. And on my next slide is utilizing OWASP. So I downloaded OWASP on my Kali Linux, and then I ran it against my QGIS machine IP address, which is 192.168.56.112. And here are the vulnerabilities that are actually present. So this vulnerability actually came from all the open ports, and you can see that the SQL injection, the absence of the anti-CRSF token, the content security policy, server lake information, S content type option header missing, and so on and so forth. So these are the vulnerability that the OWASP were of, that actually came out from the using OWASP. And then on my next slide is the vulnerability as well, which is the server leak version information via server HTTP response header field. So this one came from port the Apache 2.0.52, which is the open port 443. So here is to identify and summarize the CSRF, which is a cross-site request forgery. So CSRF is a malicious attack where an attacker tricks a user into performing actions on a website without their knowledge or consent. So it takes advantage of the trust that websites have in users' browsers, and then the ability to automatically include cookies in requests. So in a CSRF attack, the attacker crafts a malicious request that appears to be legitimate and trick the user browsers into sending it to the target website. So this allows the attacker to perform actions on behalf of the users. So such as changing their account settings, making unauthorized purchases, or even deleting their account. So the user is completely unaware of these actions as they appear to be initiated by them, right? So social engineering platforms are frequently utilized by attackers to initiate a CSR attack. So this involves deceiving the victim into clicking on a URL that contains a special design authorized request for a specific web application. So my next slide is to identify and summarize SSS. So SSS is also known as a cross-site scripting. So it's a type of web application attack where malicious code is injected into a trusted web application to gather information from unsuspecting users. So the attacker pretends to send legitimate messages to the victim. So it can be compared to like a terrorist attack in a movie, right? So in this kind of situation, this provide a perfect cover for the attack. So the SSS attack are carried out by exploiting vulnerabilities in the code of web applications. So the main goal of this attack is to cause damage to the web application, but it is the users who are most vulnerable and affected by this kind of damage. So this is because attacker can gain access to private and sensitive information. So the ultimate aim of SSS is to use trusted web applications with weak codes as a means to transmit harmful codes to users. And on my next slide is installing Nexus, a vulnerability scanning tool. So I installed that on my Kali Linux, and then I use that to run my QPRIS IP address, and then I found out several vulnerability present. I have 4 that are critical, which is in red. I have about 28 on the I. I have about 27 vulnerability, which is medium, and then I have 8, which is on the low vulnerabilities. And then here's still the some of them that shows high. And then on my next slide is to explore at least 10 possible vulnerability identifier using my Nikto, my OWASP, and Nessus. So these are some of the vulnerability that actually came out from utilizing my Nikto, my OWASP, and my Nessus. We have the absence of the anti-CRS token 2, we have the server leak information, we have the content security policy ether, we have the anti-clicking jacking missing, we have the Unix operating system version not detected, and so on and so forth. So this one came out from from the open ports, and then by utilizing the vulnerability, utilizing the Nikto and OWASP and Nessus tools, I was able to found the weaknesses on this open port. So here is utilizing my Nessus, OWASP, and Nikto for vulnerability analysis and mapping. So here are the steps, for vulnerability analysis and mapping. We have the testing of the open web application security. We have to perform open source security testing for application. We have to be able to identify the remote exploit vulnerability, identification of vulnerability, automated analysis and manual analysis, exploring the vulnerability of the application, taking proper evidence of the confirmation of the vulnerability. So in order to follow all these steps, and then to be able to get the vulnerability analysis and mapping of the system, we need to conduct a vulnerability analysis and mapping. So we must effectively employ vulnerability scanning tools. It's either like what I use. I use Nessus, OWASP, and Nikto. So by utilizing these tools, one can thoroughly examine and assess potential weaknesses and vulnerability within a system or network. So this process involves identifying and assessing the various vulnerabilities that are present, mapping the locations and determining the potential impact they could have on the overall security of the system. So through this analysis, organization can gain valuable insight into specific areas that require immediate attention and remediation in order to enhance the overall security posture. So by conducting a comprehensive vulnerability analysis and mapping, organization can proactively identify and mitigate potential threats, ensuring the continued integrity and protection of the system and network at all times. So my next slide is to utilize various tools and techniques to discover vulnerability on the system. So for my Kyopris machine, I actually utilize OWASP, Nikto, and Nessus. So to effectively apply the tools and techniques for identifying vulnerabilities, one must first understand the importance of vulnerability assessment and the potential risk associated with a compromised system. So the process begins with conducting a thorough analysis of the system, the network, or the application that needs to be evaluated for vulnerabilities. So some of the tools that I utilize for my lab test are Nikto, OWASP, and Nessus. So these tools are designed to automatically scan and assess the security of my system, of the system that I actually working on, which is the Kyopris 2. So these tools identify potential vulnerability on my Kyopris machine 2 by examining the configuration settings, by examining the installed software and network infrastructure of the system. So it provides a comprehensive report outlining the identified vulnerability along with the recommendation for remediation. For instance, for my Nessus now, even with all the vulnerability present, it actually show at the bottom to say these are the solutions to the vulnerability that were found. So once the vulnerabilities are identified, it is essential to prioritize and address them accordingly. So we have the one that are on critical, we have the one that are on high, we have the one for medium, low. So you have to be able to prioritize which one you need to address first. So a risk-based approach can be employed to determine which vulnerability poses the most significant threat and should be addressed first. So this involves considering the potential impact, the likelihood of the exploitation, and the availability resources for remediation. So we have another technique that can be employed, which is the penetration testing. So this involves simulating real-world attack to evaluate the system's ability to withstand potential threats. So by mimicking the action of a malicious hacker, penetration testing can uncover vulnerability that may not be detected by automated tools. So this technique involves a combination of a manual and automated testing method, including network scanning, password cracking, and social engineering. So on my next slide is to utilize floor hypothesis method to provide a hypothesis based on my findings. So for the floors from port 3306, which is my SQL, and port 443, which is the Apache 2.052 CentOS. And if you can see right here that the vulnerability for the SQL and then the one for the Apache, which is the port 443. So during the process of my vulnerability scanning, it has been identified that the server which is the 443, is leaking version through a server that is open, right, on port 443. So this poses a potential security risk as the disclosed version information could be exploited by the hackers to target specific vulnerability associated with that particular server version. So it is crucial to address this issue promptly in order to enhance the overall security of a system, by protecting the system against potential cyber threat. And then the other one, which is the flow from port 3306, and which is the MySQL. So a SQL injection occurs when an attacker exploits a vulnerability in a system that is connected to an open port 3306. So this specific port is commonly used for MySQL database management system. So by injecting a malicious SQL code through this open port, the attacker can manipulate this database and potentially gain unauthorized access to sensitive information or perform unauthorized action within the system. So SQL injection, a common and dangerous form of attack that can have severe consequences for affected system. So when an open port 330 is targeted, it means that the attacker has discovered a weakness in the system security measure, so allowing them to exploit and manipulate the database using SQL command. So the SQL injection attack on open port 337 can have significant consequences, potentially leading to data breaches, unauthorized access, and system compromise. So on my next slide is the attack vectors we hypothesize using and why. So here we have various attack vectors. We have the SQL injection, man in the middle, malware, phishing, cryptojacking, SSS attacks, social engineering, and ransomware. But today I'll be talking about the SQL injection. So there are various reasons why attackers resort to employing SQL injection, techniques during their malicious activities. So SQL injection as a common form of a web application vulnerability, allows the attacker to, to manipulate and exploit the underlying database of a targeted system. So by injecting malicious SQL code into an application input field, attacker can bypass security measures and gain unauthorized access to sensitive data, modify or delete database record, or even take control of the entire system. So one major reason for attacker to utilize SQL injection is the potential for financial gain. So by accessing and extracting valuable information such as credit card details, information identification data, or any kind of information that they know they can use against the victim, the attacker can engage in various fraudulent activities, including identity theft, unauthorized transaction, or selling the stolen data on the black market. So SQL injection attack can also be carried out for malicious purposes, such as causing disruption or damage to a target entity. So by manipulating the database, attacker can overwrite or delete critical information, leading to data loss, service outage, or even system crashes. So this can result in a significant financial loss, reputational damages, or even legal consequences for the affected organization. So on my next slide is, is the part of the SQL injection, how it all came to life, and then how you can actually, read about why we need to prevent SQL injection in the first place. So here is to apply techniques to trace a vulnerability to its root. So here you have to be able to identify the problem. You have to be able to define the problem. You have to understand the problem, identify the root cause of the problem, and then take corrective action. So penetration testing involves stimulating real-world attack on a system or network to identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So in order to identify the root cause of a vulnerability, various techniques can be employed to trace its origin. So these techniques involve a systematic approach that includes, thorough investigation, analysis, documentation, identifying the problem. So by analyzing the results of these tests, one can pinpoint the specific areas of the system that are prone to exploitation and determine the root cause of the vulnerability. So one technique to trace a vulnerability to its root cause is through vulnerability scanning. So which is one of the ones I did, by using my Nessus, my OWASP, my Nikto, so to be able to trace a vulnerability to its root cause, you have to be able to use the vulnerability scanning and assessment. So this involves the use of specialized software tools that scan and analyze a system or network for potential vulnerabilities. So the result of this scan can provide valuable insight into the vulnerability present, and it can help in identifying the root cause. So you have to be able to identify the problem in the first place. So you can also use the technique by conducting a thorough review of the system logs and event data. So this involves analyzing log generated by various components of the system, such as the server, the firewall, and the intrusion detection system. So by examining this log, one can identify any suspicious or unusual activities that may have led to the vulnerability. And then on this slide, I'll be analyzing the legal and ethical and industrial standard associated with the vulnerability disclosure. So on this particular side, a vulnerability disclosure policy establishes the guidelines for ethical hackers to detect and report security vulnerabilities. So it enables them to identify and provide information regarding these vulnerabilities in a responsible and ethical manner. So vulnerability disclosure in pen testing is governed by various legal, ethical, and industrial standards that outline the proper practices and protocol to follow when identifying and reporting vulnerabilities. So this standard ensures that ethical hackers or pen testers operate within the confines of the law, maintain professional integrity, and protect the interests of all parties involved. So ethical consideration play a crucial role in vulnerability disclosure as well. So when you talk about when to disclose the vulnerability, we have to understand the fact that there are some vulnerabilities that are that actually needs to be disclosed right in there, right? So while responsible disclosure practices are typically encouraged, there might be instances where immediate disclosure is necessary, particularly when the vulnerability is actively being exploited or the vendor's organization is unresponsive. So one key consideration in deciding whether to disclose a vulnerability is the potential harm it could pose to user or to the systems. So if a vulnerability is relatively minor and can be easily mitigated, it may be more appropriate to disclose it immediately to ensure user can take necessary precaution. So on the other hand, if the vulnerability is severe and could lead to significant damage or compromise sensitive information, a responsible disclosure approach may be preferred. So this approach involves privately notifying the vendors or organization responsible for the software or the system, allowing them time to develop and release a patch or fix before disclosing the vulnerability to the public. And thank you so much for listening. And here are my references, and thank you so much and have a good one. Thank you. Bye.